I'm a little scattered. So we're talking about, right, the crown chakra, and so far we've been sort of reflecting on how that tunes into the Maslow's hierarchy. Um, and so if we look at the model, uh, the crown chakra. Last week we talked about the third eye, which was more of our intuition. The crown chakra ties into sort of that like self-actualization need. So what is our perception of ourself, and then the transcendent need, of course. And I just put so the crown chakra in its natural element is thought, and it's associated with the element of thought. This energy center controls our connection to spirit, like our sense of spirit, as well as our sense of universal consciousness. So how we tie into everything. Wisdom, unity, and self-knowledge. Its associated color is violet, reflective of its connection to spirituality and enlightenment. So this is a little bit different than, so when we think about religion, for example, and the relationship that we may have with the God or the higher power of our choosing or of our understanding, um, religion is sort of like a series of understandings and lessons that we can learn, whereas spirituality is more that piece about what do we do with that, like how does it show up in our actual lives, how does it show up in our for us, um, altogether as a holistic approach. And then things to consider with this is our connection to ourself, and the connection to the other chakras. So Jordo a couple weeks ago had sort of talked about, like, even though we're focusing on these chakras, they all tie in with each other. They all interact and connect with each other. What are our connections to others in any form? So that can be relationship, that can be family, that can just be what it looks like to share space. Like recently in Ottawa, I was looking at the bus crowding situation again. And I thought, oh, so we're back to being right next to each other and stuffed into a box kind of thing. So it's, that's something to consider about how do we coexist and share space with others. And then what is our broader connection to literally everything that's alive, right? So, and just the universe in itself, like that's the sort of deeper meaning. Um, Jordo, did you have stuff to add to that? I see your hand.
Yeah, I just wanted to add a couple. I'm glad you brought about the idea that all the chakras are connected too. And I just wanted to, just call in how everybody had a little bit different definition of wisdom. And I think that really speaks to an important aspect of wisdom, is that we all have an inner wisdom that we can tap into. And just as we all described it a little differently, what's wise action for one person may not be wise action for another. And that kind of reminds me of what Ellen said too, and that, like, I know sometimes what I know for my wisdom doesn't necessarily resonate with somebody else. And I think there's some truth and some power in recognizing that. And also how she mentioned that even when she's unsure of her wisdom, when she's received that invitation to share some of it, it tends to be received a lot better. And that's been a powerful lesson to me, is like that power of invitation. It's like, I know in a lot of situations in my life, I felt like, I feel like I really have a grasp on this situation, and through my own experience and inner wisdom can shed light on this topic. But if I'm not, prompted to share that, sometimes it just is not received well. And that's something I continue to learn. Then also I wanted to touch on something Michelle said, and the way she was describing her wisdom in her life reminded me a lot of our discussion on intuition last week in the third eye chakra. And I don't think you were there last week, Michelle, but I think that's such a powerful thing to bring up, because just as Angus brought up, that our chakras, especially the chakra centers next to each other, are very interrelated. And I think that wisdom is tied heavily to intuition. And knowing how to listen to that intuition is an act of wisdom. And I just wanted to bring that up because I feel like, you know, it's easy to get into these bubbles of like, oh, this is the crown chakra and this is what it means, but it's, you know, that's just scratching the surface. They're all very interconnected, complicated energy centers that feed and play off of each other, especially the ones surrounding them.
Mhm.
That's all I wanted to say. I didn't want to interrupt you because you were beautifully explaining about the crown chakra. So thank you.
Well, I appreciate the interruption and your input because, yeah, I just love that we share this. And you know, that's what I kind of want to point out too, is how that ties into Maslow's model, right? So the idea, like when we're talking about chakras, because this is the mindful meetup, right? So we're learning a little bit about this tool. But when we're thinking about how chakras interact with each other, it's similar to Maslow's model of needs, right? So when we look at those base needs, when we think about our root chakra, our sacral chakra, and when we're looking at like our physiological needs and our need for safety and belonging, those upper needs, those transcendent needs, those thoughts and feelings and connections and you know, relationships, they drive our sense of safety and security and where we're at, right? So a lack of that can actually send us all over the map. So, Scott, do you mind sharing the next slide? And then the other thing I want to talk about is, and this sort of taps a little bit into my peer support and my mental health and addiction recovery work that I do, because if we're not making actual connection with people and making sure that we're on the same page, then everything just turns into advice, right? Then we're just a couple of speaker boxes talking at each other. And it's not to say that that's what's happening when we're trying to share our wisdom with people, but if it's not being picked up and responded to in a way that we feel is relevant to us, then that could just be a sign, right? That maybe we had more of an attachment to that information than the person who's talking to us, right? So I just kind of wanted to point that out. I've learned over the years that when it comes to things like politics, religion, and all of those things, everybody has a pretty, you know, set idea about what that looks like.